woman who was the cause of Kevin's death. Tiki, tell my listener a little bit about tell my listener what happened. He heard about it at the time, but has faded from his memory. What's the story about Kevin and Tish?
Well, on July 31st, 2011, Kevin left work on Highway 153, worked at Buffalo Wild Wings, and left work, headed home 1:30 in the morning, and only got 3 miles down the road when he met Tish head on. She had been at a housewarming party that was planned for a coworker, and they thought they had planned everything that they needed to plan, but the most important thing that didn't get planned was how everyone was going to get home safely, because they were serving alcohol. And it was, she's just a normal, everyday person, single mom, 11-year career at one of the local hospitals, and just trying to make a living and doing what you do to raise a family on your own. And went out that night to have fun with her friends, and by the end of the evening, it cost Kevin his life. Kevin didn't die on impact. He lived less than 32 hours, was very badly injured from head to toe. But his fatal injuries were his brain injuries. He had 4. And on August the 1st, 2011, at 8:57 in the morning, we heard the words that no one should ever have to hear over a 100% preventable crime, that Kevin was brain dead. And because of the choice that Tish made to drink and drive, it forced our family to have to make choices that we shouldn't have been in a position to make. We had to choose a casket. We had to choose a place to bury him, songs for his funeral. And the list just goes on and on, all because of the one choice that was 100% preventable. Tish was sentenced on April the 3rd, 2012, 8 months after the wreck. She was sentenced to 8 years vehicular homicide by intoxication.
You said it was 8 years?
8 years, yes, sir. And she also got 6 years supervised probation once that 8 years was over, for reckless endangerment, because she was on the wrong side of the highway. Her parole hearing came around 11 months after, and prior to that, we had been writing letters back and forth and forming a friendship, and because she had expressed wanting to be part of our organization 1 and 3 to help spread awareness and hopefully change people's minds about getting behind the wheel intoxicated. And so I took her at her word, and went and asked the parole board to allow her to come home, and they granted that. 19 months later, she was released in November of 2013, and the picture that you're showing now, that was on sentencing day, actually, April the 3rd, 2011, the day after what would have been Kevin's 26th birthday. But she was released in 2013, that November, and by January, we were speaking together. We go to schools and rehab centers and churches and youth groups and anywhere and everywhere that will allow us to come and share our story of choices matter, because her choice mattered. And so that we just try to change people's minds by sharing our real life story of the impact of drinking and driving.
This is David Tulis. We do thank you for joining us. We argue on my show here that you should love your neighbor and buy local, and we insist that near is better than far, small than big, simple than complex, personal than corporate, and physical than abstract. We're talking with Nikki Finlayson. There have been some long stories, very, very gracious stories in the press about your family's distress. You have formed a nonprofit organization, 1 in 3, and the idea there is what does that mean? 1 in 3.
Our name came from what was the current statistic in 2011, that 1 in 3 people are impacted by drinking and driving. Unfortunately, in October of 2014, that statistic changed to 2 in 3 people will be impacted by drinking and driving at some point in your lifetime.
Well, all right, what is that? What does impacted by drunk driving mean exactly? That's a very large number, and it seems rather hard to believe. What is included in that idea of impacted by?
Well, it includes the drunk driver, the victim, the families on both sides, the friends on both sides. You will know someone that has been impacted, if not yourself, by drinking and driving.
In a story that was written in the Times Free Press by Joan Garrett McLean, you're quoted as saying, "Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Holding anything against her, that is to say the defendant in the case, holding anything against her doesn't change the fact that Kevin isn't here. I chose to take control." Talk about that, please.
Well, it definitely wasn't my first reaction. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And I actually forgave very early on while we were still in the hospital before Kevin was pronounced. And it was because I wanted to be able to use Kevin's story to bring awareness and, make an impact in the community. I didn't want it to come across as angry or finger pointing at anyone in any way. I wanted it to be informative and educational. And I knew for me to be able to do that, that forgiveness had to be a part of that process for me. And so I chose to forgive her. And that's exactly what it was. It was a choice because, like I said, I didn't feel like doing that. And I had to keep reminding myself every time that feeling of anger would come up. I would remind myself, nope, I chose to forgive, and I'm expecting something good to come out of this. And eventually, my feelings started getting in line with what I was actually saying.
With your intentions.
Exactly. And because of that forgiveness, it allowed Tish and I to be able to form a friendship, and it is truly a friendship, and to be able to stand side by side and relive that horrific day over and over and over numerous times a month.
In recounting the story.
Exactly. We stand side by side and we just kind of kick it back and forth, telling the timeline of what happened and the events of that day. And forgiveness has allowed us to be able to do that. And I'm so thankful that I made that choice.
Is it possible, Tikki Finlayson, that forgiveness comes from a recognition of the providence of God and the sovereignty of God, who, if God is in fact sovereign and does control all things, you really have to say that there is nothing that's outside of his will. There's really nothing that's an accident. Things are ordained by him, which seem certainly evil, as in the death of Kevin Yates, but which are part of his providence. Remember the story of Joseph telling his brothers who had sold him into slavery, God intended that for good, though you meant it for evil.
Exactly. Well, God definitely is sovereign and he is in control. And a lot of people ask me, well, why would God, let this happen to Kevin? Well, I personally believe that God was there. He was with Kevin the whole time. But because of sin in the world, sin is what happened to Kevin. The result of sin, which was Tish drinking and driving, and that happened to kill Kevin. Basically, it's like casualties of war.
Because she was inebriated, she disallowed herself probably of her natural instinct to look out for other people, to care for other people. After all, a medical professional. But here now, she drank and she lost her sense, her care for her neighbor, which ordinarily she would feel.
Exactly.
And she got behind the wheel of her car and she took off and hit your son.
Yeah. So God didn't do this to Kevin. Sin in the world did it to Kevin. And but God was with him the whole time, and God was with us the whole time. And a lot of things that are allowed to happen, they are for a greater good, and the impact that has been made in the community and around the world because of Kevin's story. There's just been so many people impacted and so many lives that are saved. And, Kevin was even an organ donor. And so because of what happened to Kevin, 4 other families got to have more time with their family members because of that choice.
What kind of reactions do people have, Tiki Finlayson, in the crowds that you address when girls and boys and men and women come up to you afterwards? What kind of things do they say about your narrative?
Well, even though our presentation is mainly focused on drunk driving awareness, our whole presentation is called Choices Matter. And because, that is our presentation and forgiveness is part of our story, we do share that of how we're able to stand next to each other and share that story. And afterwards, that is what shines through is, people come up and ask us, how in the world could you forgive the woman that killed your son? And, it's because it was a choice. And, the choice that I made allowed me to take control instead of allowing the situation to take control of my life, because otherwise I probably wouldn't be here today had I not chosen to forgive, because I would have probably grieved myself to death. I would have probably just been so angry and just curled up in a ball somewhere and just definitely not been standing here today.
Tish Stevens is the woman who joins you in these gatherings before crowds of students and others around the state. Tiki Finlayson. When Tish Stevens was prosecuted, the case was styled State of Tennessee versus Tish Stevens, and the state had the pretense to say that it is the aggrieved party. And because it exacted from her the penalty of its law, and she was tried, she was given an 8-year sentence and then a 6-year probation term after that, and spent 19 months in prison. Now, let me ask you this: when the state is the victim, you are not the victim anymore. You're not the victim. You are not the party that has been aggrieved. You and your second husband, your son, the son who died was from your first marriage. Mm-hmm. You are not given any compensation. You are not cared for by the state. In what way could the state of Tennessee have done better in protecting you and looking out for your interests? Because in the end, because it was the moving party in the case, and because it imposed a prison sentence, it didn't have to do anything in your favor. It didn't have to bring itself to think about, okay, how can Tish Stevens compensate you or in some way make good what was an act that was not intentional. So it wasn't a murder. It wasn't a capital offense. It was a tort and a wrong. What could the state have done differently, do you suppose, Tiki, to make things right for you, so that she could have compensated you and your family somehow?
There is absolutely nothing that could be done to right what was, done for me, unless someone could bring Kevin back, which was not going to happen. And that's why for me, forgiveness had to be a part of that, because there was no changing the fact that Kevin was never coming back. He would, never be in my life again here on earth. And that's where Tish and I have come to the place of, there's nothing she can do to change what happened. There's no way she can fix it. But the best thing that she can do to help me move forward is moving forward herself and becoming the person that God created her to be. And that's exactly what she's done.
So you did not sue her or her family for, in the civil case, saying my son's life was worth $750,000 and I demand compensation for the loss of my son. You did not do that.
I did not do that simply because I know she was going to prison. So how in the world, would I get that kind of money if I had done that? And secondly, her family didn't ask to be put in that position. So why would I sue her family? Because her family wasn't.
Well, you would have sued her.
Exactly. So why would I, put her family in a position to, lose a house, their cars, whatever, if she had to sell all that to give me money?
So you're not upset, Tiki, or offended that the state did not seek restitution in this case?
Well, I actually could have pursued that, but I chose not to.
Was that as part of the criminal proceedings?
No, it would have had to been separate.
Okay. But I guess the question is, the case is finished. The state of Tennessee is satisfied. It has no grievance. The peace and tranquility, its peace and tranquility have been restored to it and to ostensibly to the public by the imprisonment for 19 months of Tish Stevens. It did not seek to make any kind of arrangements to compensate you financially or by other means for your son's death, and you're not upset. Is that right? You're not angry that it didn't do more for you because. Go ahead.
No. The only compensation that we did receive was through victim services that helped some with the funeral costs, but it didn't at all cover it.
Is that a state function or is that a state office?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And excuse me. But Tish is on parole now, so I mean she's still serving out her 8-year sentence. Excuse me. She's still serving out that 8-year sentence. Which will be up in 2020. After that, she will be on state supervision until 2026.
Does any of that benefit you?
No, it does not.
Would you want it to be beneficial to you somehow, since she is under state authority these many years in the future?
Well, there's really no way it could benefit me. The only benefit that I receive out of it is the fact that that she goes with me to do these presentations. So that's the way that it does benefit me is that, she is chosen. She doesn't have to. It's not a sentence for her to go with me. She's chosen to go with me and put herself in that position to be able to share our story and make an impact. And so in that way, I guess it is benefiting me.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Nikki Finlayson. She is the organizer of 3 in 1, which is a 501c3, and through that organization, she arrives at public venues where she is going to give a presentation, bringing on a large trailer behind a vehicle the smashed remains of is that an SUV?
It's actually a minivan.
A minivan in which her son was killed in July 31st in 2011. Of course, he died the next day. From massive trauma. Well, I guess the question I'm trying to get to, Tiki Finlayson, is the idea of compensation. And I've been doing some reading, and I want to recommend to my listener a book which has a great deal of legal analysis and biblical analysis. It's called Victims' Rights. It's by a writer named Gary North. This is Friday, and I'm trying to make recommendations for your reading the biblical view of civil justice. And this is an economist who's written dozens of books and many serious reviews of the Bible and a great deal of study of the Old Testament and the Hebrew Republic. In the law of God, if you will, summarized in the Ten Commandments, there is no prison. There simply is no prison, and the state's duty is to look out for the victim. And that in this case, it would have been you, the man who's died is a victim too, but he can't be benefited by any action by the state. But you can, and so that's what it looks at. There is no prison in the biblical model, but there are capital offenses, which are intentional crimes like rape and murder, and then there are all other offenses are torts or accidents. And there, the judge's job is to compensate the victim or the victim's survivors. And what happens in the view of biblical justice is that the judge oversees the negotiation between the perpetrator and the survivor. In your case, that would be between you, Tiki Finlayson, and Tish Stevens, the woman convicted of drinking while driving. And what would be worked out is, to your satisfaction, she's effectively buying her life from you. What is her life worth to her? And so she would make you an offer, and you would say that would compensate us for our loss, and then we're right. That set things are right. We agree. And it could be, that would be a civil damage, effectively. And that could be in the millions, it could be in the hundreds of thousands, but it would allow for there to be a compensation. You're saying you're not upset by the lack of that job being done by the state of Tennessee. That does not upset you.
No, it does not.
And the compensation is that you are having these lectures around the state and other states too, right? How many states have you been in to give your presentation with Tish?
We have been Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Texas.
The South and Southeast. Mm-hmm. And your compensation is not actual. It is I would say it's emotional. There's a satisfaction since the system does not reflect victims' rights and it does not reflect equity. There is no justice in the way that the system is run. You can overlook that, and the compensation is that you are doing good for other people. So there's kind of a social compensation, and you're not the one receiving it. You're the one giving it because you're making these lectures around these states, Tiki.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, I could have chosen to pursue that, but I chose not to, just simply because it wasn't going to bring Kevin back, and that with her going to prison, there wasn't really a whole lot of financial gain that I could have gotten from that, even after she was released.
Well, that's what North complains about in his analysis. Prison prevents restitution. The fact that someone's tied up for years on the state's dime in a school for crime, which is what penitentiaries are, there is no the whole idea of compensation is just wiped out. It makes it impossible. Restitution is impossible, and the person comes out of prison often debilitated, often humiliated, not skilled, not ready to enter into society again, and so it delays restitution, or makes restitution impossible in the end. So, where is your next presentation planned, Tiki?
Well, we do the Cadis and Schultz Rehab Centers once a month. We do Heyman's New Drivers once a month, and then we have schools calling us on a regular basis to go and present to the students.
What's the website, and how can my listener get in touch with you, Tiki Finlayson?
The website is IAM, the number 1, the letter N, the number 3.org. IAM1and3.org.
I am 1 and the letter N, 3.org. IAM1and3.org. And can my listener call you?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. It's 423-402-0163.
This is David Tulis. Nikki, thanks for joining us. Tiki, that's right. Tiki Finlayson is overseeing a nonprofit organization, IAM1and3.org, and has been telling us about the killing of her son, Kevin Yates, in a DUI accident, and a great, merciful, and sweet reunion she has had for some time now with Tish Stevens, the woman convicted of the crime, who's joining her on the lecture circuit, arguing for right and good choices. This is David Tulis, Nooga Radio, and now some messages.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD.